Welcome to EPH 456, where we seek to understand the truth. In John 17:17, Jesus said, "Thy word is truth." This week, we continue our verse by verse study on the book of Job with part 11. Hope you enjoy. All right, let's bow our hearts. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for another Wednesday for us to get together, for the fellowship, to learn about you, to enjoy each other's company, to strengthen each other. We just ask, Lord, that you would impart to us your Holy Spirit to open up our hearts and minds to receive what you have for us, because we know you do. And we ask in Jesus' name, amen. Okay. All right, so where are we in the book of Job? We are heading down the home stretch, as it were. This is part 11. Man, 11 parts to this book so far. So I'm going to try to wrap this up next week. No guarantees. I planned on doing all of the Elihu discourse tonight, but some of the points that he really makes in chapters 34 through 37, I probably won't get through those tonight. They're really, really good, and he brings out some really outstanding points, so maybe we will try to cover those points. And then there's some other things that I want to point out as we go through the Elihu discourse, but we will get through the first part of it tonight. So, without further ado, we are in part 11 of Job, and so far we've talked about, in the smallest of smallest recaps, we've went through all of Job's history. We've went through all of Job's mysteries. There's only a couple left to unravel, actually just one. We've spoken about the attacks on Job, both what's happened to him physically and spiritually, and we've exhausted that. We've also, as of last week, concluded 3 rounds of litigation between Job and his friends, with last week finishing with Bildad's final suggestive accusations against Job, and then Job's rebuttals to Bildad's remarks, and then concluded with Job's final remarks. And so now that both sides, if you will, have rested their cases, Job and his friends, now that they've rested their cases, the story takes a slightly different turn. So when we first started, I described the story of Job more like a courtroom, where you have God as the righteous judge, you have the heavenly courtroom, and then it transitions to the earthly courtroom with Job and his friends. And then what's going to happen is you're about to see a combination of both in the end, finishing with God, the righteous judge, lending his final verdict on the disputes. So as we go through this, continue to think of it as a courtroom setting where the judge explains the charges. You guys have seen Law and Order and all of these other makeshift legal shows, Judge Judy and all the like, where you got the judge explains the charges, and then she's like, how do you plead? And then the defendant enters their plea, and this is immediately followed up with prosecution providing opening arguments. Basically say, here's my case, here's what I'm going to do, I'm going to prove this, that, and whatever, right? And then the defense has its turn, and then it goes through its arguments, and then opening statements, and then the case begins, and then both sides argue back and forth and debate and prove their points and all the things. And the prosecution and the defense, they provide statements. And then when all of that's done, the prosecution and the defense rests, meaning that they're done. And this is where we are in our courtroom setting. Both sides, their opinions, they're done. They're resting, if you will. And now the jury is, think of it as the jury is deliberating. But in our story, Elihu's conversation is that deliberation, if you will. So it's almost as if the jury could provide feedback or insight to both the prosecution and to the defense, and then critique them on how they presented their case. So it would be, as in this example, would be such as, well, we really liked point A, B, and C, but these points, nah, you should have left that alone. You lost us with that one. And then defense, you clearly didn't prove this, this, and this. So it's like an open critique on both sides. That's what Elihu's comments are. And so tonight, for the first time in probably, I don't know, since we started the story, maybe since the initial lesson, we won't be hearing from Job or his friends, the defense or the prosecution, if you will. Instead, we're going to be hearing from a younger / junior, not senior, like Elihu, Bildad, and Zophar. Not as respected, not as old, much younger guy, possibly an understudy to one of those three, or to Job. Bible doesn't say specifically. But Elihu provides feedback and commentary addressing, again, both sides of the argument, which is different than what we've seen and observed so far. It's been, I'm not guilty. Yes, you are guilty. Here's the reasons. No, I'm not guilty. Here's my rebuttal. Yes, you are guilty, because it's one side or the other, not both sides, and critiquing both sides objectively. And that's what Elihu's points and arguments do. So what will really be interesting is, and we'll probably touch on it next week, or we'll touch on it when we conclude Job at the end, which will either be next week or the following week, depending on how fast we can get through the other content, or how fast, I guess. So what's really interesting is how God, in the end, the ultimate judge hearing this case, reacts to all of this when he provides his insight. Because just like Satan is watching, and losing, by the way, to make sure that Job slips up, God is also watching. So we touched on a few times during this whole process of how Satan has been using his friends to manipulate them to get Job to curse God, admit defeat. Well, God is also watching, and his insight at the very end is very interesting, especially as it relates to Elihu's comments or lack thereof, which also tells you something. So a little background on Elihu, because we haven't talked about him before. So Elihu was the son of Berachel, the Buzite of the family of Ram. So you guys don't think you know the family of Ram, but you absolutely do. So Ram was believed to be the descendant of Nahor's line. And Nahor that name should sound familiar to you, because Nahor was Abraham's brother. And Lot, if you recall, was Abraham's nephew, which was Abraham's other brother, Haran's son. So there was Abraham, who had Isaac and Ishmael. And I think he had some daughters too, but I'm not sure about that. Actually, I think he had more sons too with Keturah, but anyway, I digress that. But then you have Nahor's line, which had, and Ram is in that line, and Elihu is a descendant of Ram. So, as you can see, a lot of these people are all related in some way. Another background on Elihu, as I stated before, he's younger than his elder counterparts, his elder peers, I guess, if you will, which would be Job and Eliphaz, Zophar, and Bildad, as it were, which is the reason why he waited until the more senior elderly, or people who are of elder status, if you will, finish their arguments to provide his perspective. So initially, I want you to notice the respect that young fella has when he's observing what's going on here. Now, what's interesting is he's got a lot of the right answers, and he knows that, but he waited. And it just kind of goes to the whole theme of Job with understanding effective communication. See, some people, you may have the right message, but the ears might not be ready to hear what you have to say. So when you take your ego out of that scenario, then you're able to discern what's a good time, what's not a good time, right? It's not about being right. Again, it's about getting the right results. So, what is Elihu's message? So first, he touches on God's judgment and his sovereignty. So Elihu begins his argument with asserting that God is greater than man, and his ways are beyond our understanding. And if we think about that, that really undermines both sides of the argument, Job and his friends. And why am I saying that? So Job is asking, his premise is, I'm innocent. Why am I going through this? I must plead my case. And to that, Elihu's response is, well, God is just and sovereign, so his ways are past finding out and are beyond our understanding. And then, as you know, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar's arguments were the righteous get good, the witches get the wicked gets bad. And to that, Elihu argues the same. God's ways are not our ways and beyond our understanding. Meaning that it's not as simple as good gets good, bad gets bad. If you get bad, you must be bad. It's not that simple because his ways are not our ways. So the second thing you're going to notice is there's an interesting point that Elihu brings out that the other three totally dismissed, and that's the role of suffering. So Job's friends assume, based on their beliefs, as we stated before, what you're going through, whether it be good or bad, is a direct reflection of your spiritual status. And Elihu disagrees with this point. He argues that suffering can serve as a form of discipline or testing, which is a unique idea to this group, not us, but to them, that none of this group is considered. If you recall all the lessons we've had on Job, not Eliphaz, not Zophar, not Bildad, not even Job, considered this a test. None of them do. Job's friends only accused him. And Job, for the most part, only defended himself against those accusations, but neither side considered that this was a test. And Job was suffering as a result of it. Point number 3 is God's transcendence and wisdom. See, what you're going to find is Elihu extols God's wisdom and power over the creation and the world. And he continues to point that out to the group that God's ways are inscrutable and that man should always approach God with reverence and humility. Reverence and humility. And this is a lesson that we still need to learn today. There's just clearly not enough fear of God in the world today. And my position is based on the evidence. I look at the overall actions of society. But I mean, we know that this is all by God's design, as he states in, which brings us to our first verse, Matthew 24:11 and 12. And I'll just read it really quickly. It says, many false prophets shall rise and deceive many. And this is Jesus talking about this, that what's going to happen in the last days before he comes. And then he also says this, he says, and because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. So what that means is that people just won't care about their fellow man or life in general. The love of many will wax cold. And that's confirmed in our second verse. So I'll dig that up right quick. This is reading this one from Romans 1:18 through 23. 18 through 23, which says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. That sounds like our complete society. I'll jump off that box before I even get on it. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So if you want to know these invisible attributes that are clearly seen, has anyone seen air? But try to stop breathing it. Do you see how the sun hangs in the sky? Do you see ropes behind it? But you trust it won't fall on you, right? Who tells the trees to grow right side up? How come you don't see trees growing with the roots on the top? Who tells them to do that? Who tells the river to flow one way? Who organizes that? See, these laws of nature that we take for granted are all evidence of God. But we don't see it because we're not looking for it. It's something that we take for granted. Okay? If you don't believe in gravity, has anybody ever seen gravity? I've never seen it. Has any of you guys ever seen gravity? Yet, jump off a 20-story building and tell me how it feels. See, these are all invisible attributes that are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, which is us, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were they thankful, and became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man. The fear of God. It's a real thing. It's a real thing. And when he comes, the earth will know it. Anywho, number 4. There's an interesting point with Elihu. He the rebuke of Job's attitude, which if you look at it, some of you might have thought about it and said, you know what, man, like Job's coming strong, but that might have been a little too strong. Well, Elihu criticizes Job for speaking without knowledge and for questioning God's judgment. He challenges Job's assertions and descriptions of his innocence and suggests that Job should be more focused on God's greatness rather than his own vindication. That's deep, man. Yet another lesson we need to learn today. Because in our society, as you guys all know, we only care about the things that affect us. What affects me, right? Not how we affect others, which ultimately reflects on our service to God, right? 2 basic commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind. And the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? So, quick little story. So on Sunday, me and Bree were in Florida, as you guys know, and we went to the Oasis Church, who was pastored by a guy by the name of Steve Cole. And it was really good to, Steve has been on our prayer list since he got injured. If you guys recall, probably about 6-7 months ago. He's been on our prayer list. Pray for Steve every day. Know he will recover. It was really cool to see the face with the name, if you will, associate the face with the name. So, but I bring that up to say part of Pastor Steve's lesson was from the book of John. And it was a correlation of Jesus's example of service illustrated through the washing of his disciples' feet. And in his explanation of this event, in Steve's explanation of this event, he discussed what it meant to wash someone's feet today. So we don't do those types of traditional things that they would have done back in those days because life and society are very different. They didn't have things like closed-toed shoes. They all wore sandals, right? So, you know, it's not, your feet aren't as dirty as what they would get. I mean, imagine like, you know, when you were a kid and you played outside barefoot and you ran into the house and stuck your foot in the tub, that tub was black. That's dirt. None of our feet are that dirty. I mean, unless you're playing around in the mud, I guess, then it would be. But his point was, what does service or washing someone's feet today look like? And his point was, it represented how we treat people despite how we're being treated. And what was really interesting is that he described service to God like a service to our man, meaning that when we serve our neighbor and our fellow man, we are also, by those actions, serving God. And he was spot on. That's totally biblical. We as servants of God really need to be conscious about that service to God often means service to others. So Elihu points on that. It's a very interesting perspective, this Elihu. His take on this is, I guess in summary, is that our understanding as mankind is very limited. And the purpose for God's suffering may not always be immediately apparent. Elihu's perspective aligns with a much larger view. He takes our focus from here, which is what these two sides are looking at, consequences, actions, and reactions, and he takes it and moves it this way and looks at from a much higher vantage point, as if God was looking at it. And which introduces other possibilities, not just action and reaction, but also considers other reasons his perspective aligns again with a much larger view that simply stated, God's ways are not our ways and are past finding out. I was reminded as I was going through this verse, I had to actually look it up because I didn't remember where it was, but 1 Samuel 16:7. And this is a point in the story where God is talking to Samuel about picking the first king of Israel, whose name was Saul, by the way, in case you guys don't remember that. So Samuel's looking for this guy to anoint to be the first king of Israel, and he's having a conversation with the Almighty. And he says, look not at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. The Lord does not see as man does. For man sees the outward appearance, but the Lord sees the heart. So with that, we're going to start Job 32, verse 1. So these three men ceased answering Job, because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel, the Buzite, of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his three friends, his wrath was aroused because they found no answer and yet had condemned Job. Now because they were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these three men, his wrath was aroused. So Elihu the son of Barachel the Buzite answered and said, I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid, and dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. That's a bar. Verse 9 is a straight up bar. Great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. That is the truth. Your age does not define your wisdom. So I made the comment today to someone else how I knew 40-year-olds with the emotional maturity of a 16-year-old. Again, age is not the be-all, end-all for acquiring wisdom. Being wise, in fact, is a gift from God. It's one of the gifts of the Spirit. 1 Corinthians 12:8, you guys can look it up. It says, for one is given by the Spirit the word of wisdom, which confirms that it's a gift. It also confirms that everybody doesn't have it, right? So I'm going to just read you the whole thing so you can get some perspective on it. 1 Corinthians, I wasn't going to do that, but I'm feeling I should do that, so I'm going to do that. All right. 1 Corinthians 12:8. So this is where Paul starts telling the Corinthians the gifts of the Spirit, right? The whole speaking in tongues, interpretation of tongues. Those are the ones that everybody kind of pays attention to. But he says, verse 7, but the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. For to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, to another the word of knowledge through the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to another working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of spirits, to another different kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit, working all these things and distributing to each one individually as he wills. Wisdom is a gift. It's a gift from the Spirit. Not everybody has it. Just like everybody can't work miracles or prophesy or whatever. Wisdom is a gift. And so if we know, based on this text, that it's a spiritual gift given to some, why do we listen to everybody about their opinions and to our situation? Why are we influenced by TikTokers and all this other crap? Why do we do that? If we know wisdom is given to some, why do we listen to everybody? Take their advice on things. I won't chase that rabbit no more. I'll leave it there. I made my point. Verse 10. Therefore I say, listen to me. I also will declare my opinion. Indeed, I waited for your words. I listened to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. This is Elihu talking to Job's friends. I paid close attention to you, and surely not one of you convinced Job or answered his words. Lest you say, we have found wisdom. God will vanquish him, not man. Now he has not directed his words against me, so I will not answer him with your words. They are dismayed and answer no more. Words escape them, and I have waited because they did not speak, because they stood still and answered no more. I also will answer my part. I too will declare my opinion, for I am full of words, and the spirit within me compels me. Indeed, my belly is like wine that has no vent, meaning it's going to burst. It's ready to burst like new wineskins. I will speak that I may find relief, like I got to get this off my chest. I must open my lips and answer. Let me not, I pray, show partiality to anyone, nor let me flatter any man, for I do not know how to flatter, else my maker would soon take me away. So, there's several key points here in Job 32. Number one, if we break this down in its most basic form, there's a couple things that we can observe. Number one, Elihu showed respect to his elders by letting them speak and engage in the back and forth. He listened. And he no doubt probably had to force himself to listen sometimes. He had to bite his tongue because he's like, hey, you probably should have said this. But he forced himself to listen until they were done talking before he began to articulate his argument. So we can take that as a lesson, because when we're talking or when someone else is talking, are we in fact listening? Second point is, we know Elihu was listening because he restates the impasse between Job and his friends. So if you look at verse 11 again, he says, indeed, I waited for your words. I listened to your reasonings while you searched out what to say. I paid close attention to you, and surely not one of you convinced Job or answered his words. So he wasn't just listening to them. He was also listening to Job. Listening. Interesting. And lastly, he's going to keep this going, and he's going to keep it 100%. Basically, in verse 32 or chapter 32, this is his setup. He's saying, look, I've observed what you said. You guys weren't making a whole lot of sense. You didn't even ask what Job was saying. Job was giving you a rebuttal. You guys didn't even ask your questions. Sit up here and I watched you guys say whatever it is you were going to say, but it didn't mean a whole lot because you weren't answering Job's questions at all. So there was no benefit to your answers. I'm paraphrasing here. Um, and then in verse 33, he shifts that over to Job. So he critiques Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, in chapter 32. In chapter 33, he moves on to Job. And he says at the end of 32, he's like, listen, I'm going to keep it like it is. I'm going to tell you what I think you should have done. And then I'm going to tell you what I think you should have done. Right? 33 verse 1. But please, Job, this is still Elihu talking, hear my speech and listen to all my words. Now I open my mouth. My tongue speaks in my mouth. My words come from my upright heart. My lips utter pure knowledge. The Spirit of God has made me, and the breath of the Almighty gives me life. If you can answer me, set your words in order before me. Take your stand. Truly I am as your spokesperson before God. I also have been formed out of clay. Surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I have heard the sound of your words. Saying, okay, so let me stop. So Elihu is basically telling Job, listen, man, I'm going to speak to you. I listened to you. I heard what you had to say. I'm not going to attack you. I'm not going to do these things. And that's when he says, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Surely no fear of me will terrify you, nor will my hand be heavy on you. Meaning that, hey man, I'm going to be objective. I'm not just going to attack your person. I'm not going to insult you. I'm not going to do some of the things that these other three did. But I want you to hear me, what I have to say. And verse 9. I'm sorry, verse 8. Let me read verse 8 again because it sets it up. Surely you have spoken in my hearing, and I've heard the sound of your words, saying, I am pure, without transgression. I am innocent, and there is no iniquity in me. Yet he finds occasions against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks, and he watches all my paths. So in this, Elihu is basically restating Job's position that Job has articulated to his friends up until this point. So what this confirms, again, Elihu was listening. Verse 12. Look, in this you are not righteous. I will answer you. For God is greater than man. Why do you contend with him? For he does not give an accounting of any of his words. For God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls upon men while slumbering on their beds, then he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction, in order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man. He keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Man is also chastened with pain on his bed, and with strong pain in many of his bones, so that his life abhors bread and his soul succulent food. His flesh wastes away from sight, and his bones stick out, which once were not seen. Yes, his soul draws near the pit, and his life to the executioner. All right, so this statement right here, I'm going to go back to verse 12, will solve most problems in the world today. Look, in this you are not righteous. For God is greater than man. Done. Done. And then he says, why do you contend with him? Why do you contend with God? Why do you fight what he's saying? Why do you try to rationalize your position with God? He says, don't do this. Why do you try to rationalize why he said it? It doesn't matter. He said, don't do it. That means don't do it. He says, go do this. That means go do it. Why are you trying to contend with him? He does not have to give accounting for any of his words. I can't remember who asked me this question a few years ago in Bible study when they were like, well, I'd like to know why God lets some of these things happen and some of these evil things happen. And if there's something in the world that happens today and it's unfortunate, why, if God is a just God, why does he let it happen? This verse right here. He does not give an accounting of any of his words or actions. Because why? Because he's God. That's why. For God may speak in one way or another, yet man does not perceive it. This is the issue. Because as mankind, we have God on trial. Like we got the authority to do that. So you know what, God, I know what it says here, but I feel, it's my opinion, God, that this is kind of how it is because I think it should be this way. Oh, I'm sorry. Look, in this, you are not righteous. For God is greater than man. For he does not give an accounting for any of his words. For God may speak in one way or in another, yet man does not perceive it. Yeah, but I understand that. But, I just don't feel that that's right. Oh, I'm sorry. Who designated you as the keeper of truth? Verse 15. In a dream and a vision of the night, when the deep sleep falls upon men while slumbering on their beds, when he opens the ears of men and seals their instruction. In order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man, he keeps back his soul from the pit. Look at that. In order to turn man from his deed and conceal pride from man. We know we got some pride, also known as ego, also known as our opinion. And concealing him from pride, he keeps back his soul from the pit and his life from perishing by the sword. Man is also chastened with pain on his bed and the strong pain in many of his bones, so that his life abhors bread and his soul succulent food. His flesh wastes away from sight. His bones stick out, which were once not seen, yet his soul draws near the pit and his life to the executioners. So what that means is that man's life on this earth is temporary. That could be summed up like that. Verse 23. If there is a messenger for him, a mediator, one among 1,000, to show man his uprightness, then he is gracious to him and says, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. This is why I can't skip through Elihu. This is why I wanted to just skip through 34, 35, 36, and 37, but it's just too good. So in this, as you know, the Bibles are in layers. In this couple verses here is a prelude and an allusion to what Jesus Christ ultimately is for us. This is Elihu pointing to that. If there is a messenger for man, verse 23, basically, a mediator, one among 1,000, to show man his uprightness, then he is gracious to him and says, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. His flesh shall be young like a child's. He shall return to the days of his youth. He shall pray to God, and he will delight in him. He shall see his face with joy, for he restores to man his righteousness. Then he looks at man and says, I have sinned and perverted what was right, and it did not profit me. He will redeem his soul from going down to the pit. and his life shall see the light. Behold, God works all these things. Twice, in fact, 3 times with a man, to bring his soul from the pit, that he may be delighted with the light of life. Let me pause there right quick. What Elihu so eloquently put there is he described our struggle in this life. He describes the ups and downs, how many times we fall, how many times God has to redeem us daily, essentially. We would think that as much as we know, we would be much better servants, but it's actually the other way around. We're probably worse off than what we were, unfortunately. But in this, I find hope in verses 27 through 30 when he says, then he looks at man and says, I've sinned and perverted what was right, and it did not profit me. That is the conclusion that we all need to come to. I've sinned and perverted what was right, and it did not profit me. And then there's hope. He will redeem his soul from going down to the pit, and his life shall see the light. Behold, God works all these things. Twice, in fact. 3 times with a man. Meaning over and over and over. Verse 27 and 28, over and over and over. To bring his soul from the pit, that he might be enlightened with the light of life. Give ear, Job, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak, for I desire to justify you. If not, listen to me. Hold your peace, and I will teach you wisdom. So, I have a question for all of you. If you were in a debate, like Job and his friends were, and somebody told you, listen to what I'm saying, I will teach you wisdom. Or they tell you, I'm going to give you a perspective that you have definitely not considered or overlooked. I want you to just pause right now. And I want you to think about what I just said, how that made you felt when I said, I will teach you wisdom. When you imagine someone saying that to you, did you feel yourself getting in a defensive posture? Did you feel your attitude changing? Did you feel those walls of defense going up? When I said, when you heard the words of Elihu, hold your peace and I will teach you wisdom. I can tell you when I've read this verse in the past, that's exactly what I felt. I was like, dude, who is this guy I think he is? Like, what is going on here? Teach me wisdom, bruh, please. That's what we're thinking. But in reality is, Elihu's comments were the truth so far. And constructive criticism for Job and for his friends. And they were coming from a humble, unconventional source. One would think they would have came from Eliphaz or Bildad or Zophar, one of the senior members. But in fact, wisdom is coming from young fella, from Elihu. My point is that sometimes constructive criticism comes from a humble, unconventional source, which is something that we should remain objective to. So, Elihu's commentary so far, or advice to Job, really serves as a critical transition and prepares the way for God's response to Job. His advice reminds all of us the importance of humility before an almighty God and the necessity of trusting in God's sovereign and just nature. No matter what you're going through, all suffering, any uncertainty. A buddy of mine told me last couple weeks that we've been going through this process. He said, JB, if you can do it or if you can see yourself doing it, it is in faith. It is in faith. Because you're always going to trust yourself. You're always going to trust what you can see. It's just human nature. We're taught that since birth, to trust what we see. Whether it be subconsciously, consciously, whatever the case may be, you're taught that. But if you can see yourself doing it, I can see myself paying for that. I can see myself buying that. I can see myself accomplishing that goal. I can see myself doing this. And you have a plan to be able to do it, and you know that you can do it with little to no help, that isn't faith. Faith is doing something that you know you cannot do on your own. That's when faith is tested. That's when it's tested. So, next week, I am going to get through Job 34 through 37. You can read those if you want. If you want to come back with questions, that's cool. I'm going to make my way through those 4 chapters for certain, which will make way for God's commentary the week after, if I can't get through all of it. I planned on doing this in 1 week, but like I said, man, Elihu's advice, dude, is just too good to gloss over. There's a lot of really key points he makes in there that applies to our life today. And that's just what you get, man. Verse by verse, baby. That's what you get. Any questions? Thank you for watching. And may the Lord watch between me and thee while we're absent one from another.